So as you may have picked up, that we have decided to spend April thinking about Anabaptism, thinking about the roots that we have as a Mennonite people, and we'll be presenting 4 sermons. I'm grateful that Thomas has agreed to do next week, and hopefully they will stimulate some thoughts and some discussion that we can have later on, and that you can have as you gather at various places during the week as well. So how is your relationship with sausage? Is it comfortable or is it conflicted? Is it a love-hate relationship? You love eating it, but you really hate some of the effects it has on your body? Do you long for it but resist it? Do you eat it in secret and feel a bit guilty? Do you quiver or flinch or tremble when you hear words like bratwurst, farmer sausage, garlic sausage, summer sausage, hot dog, or most subversive of all, Mennonite sausage? Well, if you have mixed feelings about sausage, even an intrinsic, mysterious, unexplainable response to it, it may be with good reason, because on March the 9th, 1522, at a home in Zurich, Switzerland, about 12 people got together and ceremoniously ate 2 sausages. Not enough for 12 people. I know that's what we're thinking, but it was ceremonial. Why? They did it because they weren't supposed to. And why weren't they supposed to? Was it because they were vegetarians? No. Was it because the doctor said it's not good for you, there's too much cholesterol? No. They weren't supposed to because the church said they weren't supposed to. How would you like those kinds of rules? Here, no sausage. Well, it wasn't throughout the year. The church said they weren't supposed to during that time because it was a Lenten fast. And for these people in that house eating those sausages, this was an act of defiance, of protest. It was an act of resisting what they considered to be a corrupt church. And almost 3 years later, on January 21st, 1525, a group of radical reformers met. A group that thought Luther hadn't taken things far enough, Zwingli hadn't taken things far enough. They met and they baptized each other. Again, in complete defiance of the church. And it is this event that is typically referred to as how Anabaptism began. And while, yes, this was an important event, Anabaptism cannot be defined by that event alone. Because then it would simply mean that Anabaptists baptize adults. It's not adequate to simply go back to the beginning of something in order to determine what that something was in its purest form. It's not enough to think that if we go back to the beginning, then we're going to get the real thing. And that applies to Anabaptism. It applies to the Christian church. It's important to examine the roots of the event. Why did it happen? What was the motivation? What were the circumstances? It's important to examine the larger movement to determine why this happened. Well, The larger context of this was very much one of change and conflict and upheaval. The Peasant War was a movement that revolted against the authorities and resisted the systems that kept them poor and oppressed. And the church was tightly woven with the governing powers. It perpetuated a class system. It dictated to the masses what they should believe. The masses didn't really have access to scriptural information and academic information. The church perpetuated all of this oppression. And the church exacted from the people a tithe that was not used locally, not even for their own local priest, but it was sent to the hierarchy of the church. At the heart of Anabaptism is this radical belief that we can, in fact, and are called, in fact, to actually follow Jesus. It's very simple. They believed that they could be imitators of Christ. That's the language they used. Imitators of Christ. That still isn't a belief in many denominations. There's still a belief that, well, some of the teachings, yes, but some, no, we can't, not in this life, that's for another world. The Anabaptists, the early radical reformers thought, no, what Jesus teaches, what Jesus demonstrated, we're called to do that in this life. They believed that they should be imitators of the Jesus who said, I am here to proclaim good news and liberty. I am here to wash your feet. I am here to challenge the corrupt church. I am here to demonstrate nonviolence. I am here to love and to serve. I am here to break down walls and barriers between people. So this identifies us as a people that advocates for the oppressed and the marginalized. A people that offers alternatives to the views that support and prop up systems that allow gaps and barriers in our world. Economic, social, religious, and political systems that separate us from each other. Reformations and new beginnings and meaningful changes don't happen in neat and tidy ways. They don't come from getting together conveniently in safe and comfortable places and saying, let's start a revolution. They come from difficulty and injustice and occupation and oppression. Jesus said, I am here to bring good news to the poor because there were poor people. Jesus said, I am here to proclaim release to the captives because there were captives. Captives of all kinds. Jesus said, I am here to proclaim recovery of sight to the blind because there were blind people. And the gospel stories of people recovering their sight were not simply stories of physical healing. They were stories of being restored back into community. Blind and sick people were pushed out of the community, out of society. And Jesus restored them back to being included, back so that they could work, and belong and live complete lives. In Matthew's version of the story where Jesus caused a riot in the temple, after all the sellers and all the buyers were sent out, in came the blind and the lame and the children. The very ones who had been shut out of the temple, not allowed into the temple, in they came and saw Jesus. Jesus said, "I am here to let the oppressed go free," because there were oppressed people. Jesus said, "I am here to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor," because the redistribution of wealth and land ownership, the liberation of workers and slaves, was supposed to happen regularly. And it wasn't. This is very reminiscent of the circumstances during the 16th century. And against these circumstances, the radical reformers worked hard to show a better way. And it cost them dearly, as it cost the radical reformer, Jesus. The beginnings of Anabaptism were varied and they were messy. It was not a time of agreement and clear vision. There were long and passionate debates on many, many issues. The reformers came from many places, brought a mix of experiences and backgrounds, and there was a pervasive belief that Jesus was about to return. And that accelerated the willingness to become martyrs. And the movement was not without violence done by the reformers themselves. It was not without extremism and shameful occurrences, much of which historians have tried to minimize. And for almost 400 years, the Anabaptists were considered heretics. It was only in the 1800s that an acceptance of them emerged. And it's been in recent years only where the Anabaptists have received formal apologies, and one was from the Lutheran Church. And there's a study book available that is designed for Mennonites and Lutherans to work at together. In 1944, Harold S. Bender presented an essay at an event, an essay entitled "The Anabaptist Vision." And it came in part out of his deep concern that about half of the young Mennonite men in the U.S. were going to war. And the essay did serve a helpful purpose in providing a clarifying and kind of a unifying Mennonite identity. However, in some ways the essay was a bit sterilized and simplified, and in the way that it described the Reformation, suggesting even that the Reformation could be traced back to a sort of a single geographical beginning. More recently, scholars have concluded that movement actually comes from 3 distinct geographical areas. And we can talk about where those were, and I won't talk about that now. Indeed, the Radical Reformation had a very colorful and roller coaster-like history. A history that ranged from being hated and feared and persecuted and killed, all the way to finding favor among the elite governing entire cities, and having Rembrandt paint a portrait called The Mennonite Preacher Anslow and His Wife. An interesting picture to study if you ever have a chance. It is not from this history alone, this history itself, that we find meaningful direction today. If we depended on events alone, we might just be a sausage-eating, adult-baptizing, foot-washing community of people who don't go to war. And that may not be such a bad thing. But we are called to be so much more. It is the traditions that grew out of the Reformation that give us foundation for being faithful. Traditions like nonviolence, community, and Psalm 133, which was also read, is one of the most beautiful descriptions of community that we have in the Bible. That image of how good it is for people to live together. That image of the oil of hospitality just lavished upon us. That is a tradition also. Also the tradition of the priesthood of all believers, which we'll talk about on another Sunday. And at the heart of these traditions was the sincere belief that the teachings of Jesus must be taken seriously, and that it was possible to follow Jesus in this life. That is our tradition. To be authentic followers of a radical rabbi who made it clear what his purpose was, which was to bring justice and peace, equality, love, and restoration. Amen.